Hey guys, welcome back to another Tumbler tutorial. Today you've got a 2-for-1 tutorial with me. We're going to be working on a glitter tumbler as well as a men's just a vinyl super simple wrap. I'm using a 24-ounce Plump from the Tipsy Magnolia, and I'm going to mark off my lines at 0.75 inches. This tool that I'm using is called the Striping Assistant tool. This is from the Amy's Make Everything, and I will link it for you below. This tool is something that I use in my craft room all the time. I do a ton of split striped tumblers. Not necessarily this many stripes, but I do a lot of like quarter split tumblers, and this is my go-to tool. It takes just like 30 seconds to stripe out a cup. So what I'm doing, I just placed dots. I measured all the way top to bottom on the tumbler, creating little dots at every 0.75 of an inch. And then I'm gonna use the tool where I can, where it matches up with the dots. And from there, if I have any dots that don't match on that tool or they don't line up with the dots on my cup, I'm just gonna put that in my cup cradle using a piece of 0.75 inch painter's tape, and I'm gonna create my lines manually. Once I've finished marking off my lines, I'm gonna go in and measure out these stripes to cut the star strips out. Now you wanna make sure that the navy gap that's at the top and the bottom of the star, you want the star to be perfectly centered in the navy, if that makes sense. So you want basically equal spacing at the top and the bottom of the star. So once you lay that on your cup, it's going to be directly center of that 0.75 inch stripe. Before I laid down my vinyl and my glitter and all of that, I did go through with a Sharpie and I marked off what section or which stripe should contain which glitter or which vinyl. So I did vinyl, red, white, so on and so forth. So I ended up with 4 strips of star vinyl, and then we're gonna fill the rest in with glitter. And with the glitter, we're always gonna move darkest to lightest. So I'll show you in the next steps what I did to tape that off and prevent any cross-contamination. Next, I'm gonna tape off the stripes. So I'm gonna work darkest glitter to lightest like usual. So I'm gonna save the white for last. What I'm doing right now, I'm marking off, or I'm taping off my vinyl as well as the stripe that will hold the white glitter. You don't have to do this if you don't want to. I'm just gonna spray paint it. I find it's so much easier just to spray paint things instead of hand painting. You get great coverage with spray paint. I definitely prefer it over acrylic paint. So that is total personal preference. If you don't want to do that, you don't have to. I'm just also very particular about cross-contamination in glitters, and taping things off and making sure they're extra sealed once they're adhered to the cup is like a top priority for me. So I'm just going to tape this off, and we're going to spray paint it with just Rust-Oleum red, I think it's candy apple spray paint. And then we're going to go in with the epoxy method to apply the first round of glitter, which is going to be red. That is Sookie from Peachy Olive Glitters, and then I'll show you the rest of the process. I am going to take extra precaution in tapping off this glitter. I just want to make sure that we are lessening the amount of fallout once we are going into the white glitter section. So making sure that you tap it off really, really well is really important to prevent any cross-contamination into that white glitter. I think I got like 1 or 2 specks of glitter in the white section on this entire tumbler, which normally I try to shoot for a whole 0, but it didn't work out quite so well this time. So just being really proactive in preventing that cross-contamination will give you a great end result. I love a clean, crisp tumbler. I don't know, some people don't mind cross-contamination. I'm just very particular, and I love it when I can see the end result and there are no stray glitters. So personal preference again, but these are just the steps that I take to prevent that. Once the epoxy dried, I sprayed that 3 separate times with Krylon Triple Thick Spray to prevent any cross-contamination into the white glitters. And we're going to tape off the red section and the vinyl this time so we can go back and re-spray paint the white sections and put the white glitter on using the epoxy method. So we'll tape this up and I will see you in the next step. also forgot to show the part where I popped off the bottom so we can do a glitter booty on this cup. I didn't tape it, but all I did was put a flathead screwdriver in the crease of that bottom cavity and I tapped my hammer on it and that popped the cap right out. I'm not gonna spray paint that, but we're just gonna fill that with some glitter later on in the video. I used about 5 to 7 milliliters of Mr. President from Peachy Olive Glitters, and then I filled up the rest of that to about the 15 milliliter mark with UV epoxy. I'm gonna empty that into the cavity and then I'm going to hit that with my torch just to make sure any of those air bubbles or micro bubbles are popped. And then we're gonna put this under our UV lamp. So at this point, I have spray painted my cup and basically just trying to be efficient, and while the spray paint is drying, I'm gonna stick this under my UV light, so by the time it's done curing under the UV light, we're ready to move into our glitter. This is completely optional, but I did also include my acrylic logo tag, and I just hit that under my UV light for a quick second just to make sure that my acrylic logo tag didn't sink into my wet epoxy, so it just barely gave it a little, like a covering, if you will. I don't really know how to explain it for it to sit on top of. It was not cured fully by any means. It was quite literally like 3 seconds. I put that logo tag on there and then let that fully cure into the epoxy. Once that was dry, I let it sit for probably 10 minutes or so. I'm gonna go in with my epoxy again, and then we're going to glitter this using Flurries from Peachy Olive Glitters. Since white is really noticeable if there's any cross-contamination in your glitter shaker, I took my cup and I tapped it off in the trash just to make sure if there was any red glitter that had snuck from underneath that tape, that once I tapped the white glitter excess off into my pile there, that it wasn't cross-contaminating with red glitter. So anytime I have a super light color, I just tap that off in the trash. I don't worry about saving the excess. And then we're gonna immediately pull that tape to make sure that it's not gonna stick to the epoxy once it cures. And while that's curing, we are going to start working on our men's tumbler. These vinyls are from Banff Custom Creations, and I just marked my tumbler off using my striping assistant tool again, and I marked the top portion just a little bit less than half. I didn't want the stripes and the stars to be dead center even, so I used a little bit less for the stars, and then I had a little bit more of the stripes showing. So we're going to cut that vinyl, use the hinge method to apply the stars, and then we're going to do the same thing for the stripes, making sure that when we're applying the vinyl that the seams for the stars and the stripes are lining up together. Seams are pretty hard to cover up when you have a repetitive pattern, and so it kind of just is what it is when you lay it down. So in order to lessen the gaudiness of the seam there, we're gonna make sure that we line those seams up on the same back side of the tumbler, same place. We don't want two separate seams, like one on the front, one on the back, so just make sure that you're lining those up. Same thing with the glitter tumbler. If you noticed, all of my seams for the star vinyl stripes were in the same section, same process. With the stripe vinyl, there was no way to make it seamless. The red butted up to the red stripe, just the sizing of the cup, there's no way to fix it. If you were to cut, you know, one red stripe off, it's still going to show. It'll line either white to white or red to red. So it, like I said, it is what it is. They just kind of butt up. I don't put any like vinyl stripes or anything to cover up the seam on my tumblers. I feel like it just really draws a lot of attention to the seam. Like, hey, look at this seam here. There's just a random vinyl stripe going vertically down the cup. So again, that's personal preference. Some people do it. Some people can hide it really well. It's not something that I like to put on my tumblers. I just kind of leave it as is and hope the eye is not drawn to it unless you look closely. But ultimately, it's up to the maker of the cup. So we're just going to lay that down using the hinge method. We cut about 1 inch of backing off the vinyl while pressing the vinyl onto the cup. We're going to push the backing off in the process. As long as your vinyl is lined up straight from the start, you should be able to just glide that right off. There should be no crossing of the vinyls. It shouldn't go on crooked, anything like that. I did leave a little bit of an overhang at the bottom. I will trim that up. I just wanted to make sure I didn't short myself. We can always cut it off. We can't add more vinyl to the bottom of the cup. So once that seam meets back up to the original seam, we're going to score that and cut it with an X-Acto knife, and then we're going to trim up the bottom to make sure it looks nice and clean. I used my X-Acto knife to cut off the excess of the vinyl that was hanging off the edge, and then once I knew that my cup was going to lay flat on my cup edging tool, I just ran that around the bottom on the lowest rung that I could to cut off any of the excess vinyl to give it a straight line. And then we're going to go in, and this is transfer tape that I'm putting over top of the tumbler. It does not work great for transferring vinyl, but it does work great for covering up my cup. So you can either use transfer tape if you have some that sucks and you don't like to use it for decals, things like that, or you could use some cling wrap, some, what is it called? Saran wrap. That's the word I was looking for. And then once the majority of your cup is covered up, we're going to make sure that you're not covering that stainless steel at the bottom, and then we're going to tape it off as extra reinforcement just to make sure that when we spray the bottom of the cup with white spray paint, that none of it seeps under that tape or the transfer tape or the saran wrap, whatever you're using. We just want to make sure there's no leakage into the vinyl of the cup. So once you've spray painted that white and that white is completely dry, we're just going to put some alcohol ink on here and kind of mimic a wood grain. I wasn't too particular about it. I basically just wanted this colored something other than stainless. So I just rubbed that on there using a makeup brush. And once that was in place, I'm going to immediately pull that tape as well as my transfer tape and let that sit and dry. And normally I would spray seal things like glitter and things like that, but with this I wanted to leave it as is, so I went in with some UV epoxy to cover it, because sometimes when you spray seal an alcohol ink, or if you do like a wood grain alcohol ink, the spray sealer, depending on what you're using, will cause the alcohol ink to change color. So I've had it before where I've spray sealed it and the wood grain has turned green. I didn't want to have to deal with that, and so like I said, I just went in with UV epoxy after I put my stripes on the cup, because I don't want to use that polyacrylic. I couldn't think of the name of it. You guys, I'm really bad at the names today. I didn't want to use polyacrylic on the wood grain either to adhere that vinyl stripe into place. And so in order to kind of stick it to the cup and make sure it stays down quickly. I used UV epoxy to keep it in place to make sure that the regular setting epoxy didn't have time to seep under that vinyl stripe and cause it to lift up. At this point, I only have one coat of Flynn Sisters fast setting epoxy over top of this tumbler, and I'm going to use my Dremel tool to expose a fine line of stainless steel along the top rim, as well as using this sanding block to buff down any pokey bits. There wasn't really anything, I was just being proactive, so we didn't have any bumps when we went to line our tumbler with this vinyl. And then I made sure to buff down the bottom edge as well. And we're just going to use this textured silver metallic vinyl from Teckwrap Craft to line this. This is measured at 0.04 inches by 11.5 inches. I just cut a bunch of stripes at one time so I don't have to go in each time I'm making a cup, and I just keep them on hand in all different colors. Super duper handy, and I can just pull it out of my drawer and move on with the day. So we're gonna stripe those out from top to bottom, and again, seams are gonna be matching in the same spots on each one. The textured vinyls from Teckwrap are really great at masking seams, so I just overlap them a tiny little bit. You don't have a single clue. Even I know where I started and stopped the seam and I can't find it. So it's really great at masking those seams, but we're just gonna line that up and make sure everything is pushed down flat. We don't have any seams sticking up. And then we're gonna put it on the turner with a coat of polyacrylic. I'm rubbing my hand in the direction that the vinyl is laid down, so we're not causing any friction on the seams of the vinyl. We don't want to cause it to lift and make a little pokey piece in the vinyl or in the cup. So once that sits and cures for about 30 minutes, I'm gonna go in with another coat of epoxy. This is a second coat of epoxy. This is just the Flynn Sisters regular setting epoxy. And as long as your edges are smooth, you could potentially get away with 2 coats of epoxy. So the surface of my tumbler is completely smooth. There's just a tiny bit of roughness at the bottom edge, and that's only because these Tipsy Magnolia tumblers have kind of a harsh seam. They're not rounded, and so they're not sharp by any means, but the vinyl, or not the vinyl, the glitter tends to stick on the edges more. And so I would say probably 3 coats of epoxy and this cup could be done. And then on the final coat, I'm gonna put a tiny bit of Celestial from Rae Glitters into my epoxy. Teeny tiny amount goes such a long way. You don't want to overwhelm the design like usual. I'm just going to put a little like pinprick of it into my epoxy to give it a little bit of shimmer in that vinyl. And then after that 3rd coat of epoxy has cured, these cups are completely finished. As usual, let me know what you guys thought in the comments. Don't forget to like and subscribe if you're not already. Hit that bell button for notifications on future tutorials. I have all of the products listed and linked in the description box, as well as all of my socials and my Facebook group. And I will see you guys next weekend.